Welcome everyone,
No.
and live on Facebook. Here we go. So I think we're live. I'm not sure. I will check that in a minute, but thanks everyone for joining and welcome. I'm really honored and excited to have Gary here with us, who's the founder of ELI, Entrepreneur Learning Initiative. His background is, I will post his bio shortly, but just a snippet of his background. Himself as an entrepreneur, but also working with Kauffman Foundation on a couple of programs. One of them is the well-known Ice House, rechanging how people think about entrepreneurs and the lessons learned from as he calls them, underdog entrepreneurs. It's really exciting to have. He's been all over the world speaking on this, and his curriculum and training is used by hundreds of universities and colleges around the world. I couldn't begin to list all the countries because we'll be here for the next 2 hours. So thank you so much for making time, and thank you for joining us last Monday on the call, and for sharing your wisdom on the best way to deal with this uncertainty today. From my perspective, Gary, you've been doing this all your life, researching these entrepreneurs who this work in times and scenarios that you could never imagine it should work, and they seem to know how to do it. And I'm really excited to hear your insights of what you have learned from them, as well as experienced with them and all that stuff. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, and I'll moderate the questions. We'll take all the questions in the chat box, so please feel free to shoot me the questions there. And we'll also have an open discussion at the end. And we're streaming this live. So for those who are on Facebook, you're welcome to join us on the Zoom call. We still have some capacity before it's maxed out. And then we could still be streaming this on Facebook as well. And then I will try to capture some of those notes from Facebook. With that, Gary, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Faris. This is great to have the opportunity to connect with you in this way, in this kind of crazy time we're in right now. Little backstory: I met Faris in 2008, maybe 2009. I was doing a research project for the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute. And what we were doing is interviewing all these underdog entrepreneurs across the United States. Had a camera crew. We were going around, just capturing these stories. And that's really how I met Faris. So all this is to say that Faris is not only talking the talk, but he has definitely walked the walk. So, and someday you should get him to tell his story, because it's pretty amazing. But in any case, so this all started with me almost 30 years ago with a single question, which was, like, how do people who have no particular advantage in life manage to succeed? What I was really trying to figure out is, how do underdogs win? And, underdog entrepreneurs. So, I wasn't really interested in the Mark Zuckerbergs or the Elon Musks or the Jeff Bezos of the world. I wanted to know how people that don't have big ideas, they don't have, Stanford MBAs, they don't have access to venture capital, they don't have, huge amount of resources. How does somebody that has no advantage, how do they recognize an opportunity? But then more importantly, how do they bring that opportunity to life in spite of their circumstances? So it was really that question that set me on this journey. My idea was that if I could somehow deconstruct the mindset of these underdog or these unlikely entrepreneurs, that this could be helpful to other humans, right? And not just small business owners and aspiring entrepreneurs, but I thought, if I could somehow understand the mindset of the logic of the underdog entrepreneur, this could be helpful to people in a variety of ways. It could help marginalized people find a path, towards a better life. It could help educators, increase student engagement. It could help students develop better critical thinking, creativity, and other, important skills. And I saw this as a way to help organizational leaders create entrepreneurial culture in their companies. And you know, this is really an important thing, that it could also help displaced workers sort of reinvent themselves, right? So all this is to say that I was thinking about entrepreneurship beyond just startup. I was interested in the logic or the mindset, if you will, as a framework, as a cognitive framework that could help people see the world in a different way and thus behave in a different way. So since that time, I've had a chance to go all over the world interviewing hundreds of these underdog entrepreneurs. One of the stories that I'll share with you briefly was that of my co-author, now co-author, Clifton Talbert. I ran into him also as part of the Cisco Entrepreneur Institute research project. He was about 65 years old when I met him back in 2008, 2009, something like that. And all I knew about Cliff was that he was one of the founders of the Stairmaster exercise company, right? And my first question to him was, how did you learn how to think like an entrepreneur? And he began to tell me the story of his life, where he was born in the Mississippi Delta in this very poor cotton community. He was born to a teenage mom, didn't know a father. And, you know, his future looked pretty bleak. African-American guy in the Mississippi Delta, coming of age in the late 40s, early 50s, you know, the height of the Jim Crow South. And he started to tell me about his Uncle Cleve. And he had this uncle that owned the local ice house. And his uncle had a very primitive education, 4th or 5th grade education. He was the only guy in his community that put money in the bank. And Clifton says a 13-year-old boy, when he went to work with his uncle and he came out of work in the cotton fields and went to work with his uncle, that's how he learned to think like an entrepreneur. So what I'd like to do, Faris, is I'm going to share my screen, if you'll allow me here. See if this will work. Can you guys see my screen? Can you see my screen, Faris?
If you guys could give us thumbs up, that would be great.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. So this is a presentation I put together for a talk I did in LA a few weeks ago, and I titled it How Underdogs Win. And it's really about these 8 concepts that I distilled from hundreds of interviews with these unlikely entrepreneurs. And I just thought I'd share with you, this is the picture of Uncle Cleve, the only surviving picture. This is the picture Clifton Talbert showed me in that original interview in 2008 that became part of our book, of our story. This was a story that really sort of captured the essence of the entrepreneurial mindset in a single story. So this is, you know, a book that sort of, it tells Clifton's story, but it adds the 8 life lessons that were distilled from all of these interviews, which I'd now like to kind of briefly roll through in the hopes that you'll find these concepts empowering in this time of uncertainty and volatility. So the first thing that I noticed from interviewing entrepreneurs, and let me start by saying this. You know, when you go out with a film crew and you start interviewing entrepreneurs, you're going to hear a bunch of crazy stories, right? You're going to hear, you know, a lot of very interesting stories. And for me, it took a while. I wasn't able to like really make any sense of it. They all had different backgrounds, different interests, different skill sets. The only thing they really had in common is that they were starting with little or nothing, right? But but after a while, after 20, 30, 40, 50 interviews, you start to see patterns emerge, like patterns in the logic, patterns in the language, patterns of behavior start to emerge. And I think the first one, and probably the foundational concept, is you hear an entrepreneur talking about a vision, right? They have some kind of a compelling goal. There's something on the horizon that they're trying to get to. And, you know, they often talk about a vision, or it might be something compelling on the horizon. It might be, you know, some unpleasant circumstances they're trying to escape. But they're striving towards something compelling on the horizon. And this, to me, became really the foundation. I mean, as I reflect on this and I, you know, look at some of the psychological literature to help reinforce some of these ideas and explain why people behave this way, what they're doing without realizing it is orienting the mind towards a future positive orientation. And now what I've found in the literature is that this is a superpower, right? That we have a time orientation in our subconscious mind. And some people are like past regret. Some people are past nostalgic, right? They long for the good old days. Some people are like live in the present, like in a hedonistic kind of a way. Some people are future anxious. A lot of us are there right now, right? But some people have a positive future orientation. And that is, in what the research shows, is that single thing, that's what determines how people get themselves out of poverty in one generation. It's that's the single determining factor. Right? I posted something yesterday on Facebook about the Stockdale paradox, and you can look at that, about a prisoner of war, and how in the darkest times he was, you know, using that and telling himself a future positive story about that, about the negative experience. So I'll leave you with a rhetorical question. We can come back to this, right? Mm-hmm. But the question is, do you have a compelling goal? Like, do you know what that is? Do you have a purpose? And, you know, we can talk about this later, but one of the interesting things about human motivation is that in order for a goal to be compelling, it's got to benefit other humans, right? That's not just an altruistic morality that you choose. That's hardwired into us, right? In order to tap into the highest levels of motivation, you've got to be doing something that benefits other people. So that's the first and sort of the foundational idea that we observed in these entrepreneurs. The second thing, and this is really, really hard to overemphasize, and it's so damn simple, right? And that is that they see problems as opportunities. So if you'll allow me to dig into this for just a few moments. You know, what we saw in this research is that the entrepreneurs that fail are the ones that are trying to do something to solve a problem for themselves, right? I hate my job. I don't want to work too hard or think too much. I'm just going to open a coffee shop down the street because that sounds like it's kind of easy, and, you know, I'll have just this chill lifestyle. By and large, that's a recipe for failure. The recipe for success is what we see in the entrepreneurs that succeed is they find the problem first. And they dig into the problem and they understand the problem. And so what's at the root of this is really empathy, right? And I think that's one of the biggest discoveries I made is that, you know, I think it's useful to think of entrepreneurship as an altruistic paradox. That by serving other people, you empower yourself. But if you're just trying to get your own needs met, you're going to be blinded to opportunities. You're going to trip over opportunities every minute of every day, right? So it's another important idea. You got to be looking for problems to solve. And that, again, when you think of what is a mindset, this is a deeply held set of beliefs and deeply held mental models that the entrepreneur herself may or may not be aware of, right? They're not conscious of the logic that's driving the behavior. So the third idea is, this observation that we saw in entrepreneurs is there's a tendency, like I would call this like a bias towards action. And, to the uninitiated, this looks like recklessness. But it's really, an organismic tendency. It's like from biology. What the entrepreneurs are doing is they're micro-experimenting, right? They're trying lots of little things. And, the literature is quite clear on this. Successful entrepreneurs are not spending much time writing business plans, right? and a business plan might become germane. I mean, I guess I'm going to walk back that statement a little bit, because we just have to sort of define planning. And as the world is changing faster and faster, strategic planning is becoming less and less useful. There's a scholar named Starbuck, I think his name is William Starbuck, just like the store, like the coffee shop, that's sort of dug deeply into some of the fallacies of strategic thinking. But here's the nub here. Most of us have been taught to know before you go, to figure everything out, to plan it all out, and then to do it. And that logic makes lots of sense when the cost of failure is high, right? So in other words, you're going to walk across the highway, you better look before you go across the street because the cost of failure is very high, right? But that's sort of the only logic model we've been taught, and entrepreneurs flip that logic on its head, right? They do the exact opposite. They go in order to know, right? And that's very, very effective when the cost of failure is low and the opportunity is present but not visible. If that makes any sense, right? So what the entrepreneurs are doing through this bias towards action is they're minimizing the risks through micro experiments, right? They're testing lots of little things. They'll have an idea, they'll build some little prototype in a couple of days, or they'll show it to somebody, or they'll start talking to people about an idea. It's a feedback loop. Here's the thing. You can write a business plan and get a small business loan and mortgage your house, and you can fail at that 2 times, maybe 3 times in a lifetime, and you're done, right? What the entrepreneurs are doing is they're micro experimenting, and that just puts the odds in their favor. The probabilities shift in their favor because you can endure a lifetime of micro experiments, right? Now you just put the odds in your favor. You got more than 3 bites at the apple, right? You can keep trying and failing, trying and failing, trying and failing, trying and failing on a very small scale until you find the problem solution fit. That's really, again, it's sort of a hidden logic in the behavior of the entrepreneur, micro experimentation. All right, so the next thing that we sort of gleaned from these interviews is the entrepreneurs are always learning. They're hyper curious and they're always learning, but they're not always learning. And I do spend a lot of time training educators, and forgive me if there are educators on this call, but they're not necessarily sitting in classrooms learning in a traditional way. And I think there's a lot of lessons for educators to be learned from these underdog entrepreneurs, because these are the C students. These are the C students from school that are now, the joke goes like this, right? The A students become teachers who teach the B students how to work for the C students, right? They're always learning, but they're learning from their friends. They're learning from their experiments. They're developing social learning networks like organisms do. That's just how organisms function in nature, right? They're learning from their micro experiments. They're learning from Coursera, from YouTube videos, whatever. But they're constantly learning. So if you think of this second idea of looking for problems to solve, trying things, and learning, that's really the sort of the essence of entrepreneurial thought and process, right? That's the flywheel. You got to be looking for problems to solve. You got to be trying stuff, and you got to be learning, always learning. I'm constantly telling my adult children, like ABL, always be learning. Podcasts, audiobooks, there's no excuse not to be learning. I'm an audiobook guy because audiobooks allow me to learn in 10-minute increments when I'm driving to the grocery store. When I'm on the treadmill in the morning at the gym, I got 45 minutes of learning time. In the course of 2 years, I've got a PhD, another PhD, right? I read 25 books a year like that. That gives me a tremendous edge over anyone else who's not learning, right? That's where, Faris, one of the things, and you understand this perfectly well, everything happens in the margins. It happens in the little margin of time or resources or brain capacity that we have. And most of us just squander it, right? The ability to advance, get stronger, comes in the margins. And we all want it to come in one big package. We want a lottery winner. We want one big client. We want that one big thing. And it doesn't happen that way. It's compounded in the margins slowly over a long period of time. So here's another idea that we use at first I was sort of shocked by the frugality of the entrepreneurs we were interviewing, right? I interviewed some people, they all came from humble beginnings, but some of these guys had sold businesses for hundreds of millions of dollars. And they weren't necessarily driving Lamborghinis or living in huge mansions. They were living like relatively humble lives. And I think, the media skews our brain around that in a big, big way. And if you've ever read that book called The Millionaire Next Door, that was actually written by a couple of PhD professors, economists, I think. That like the average millionaire is not living in a McMansion. They're living in an older neighborhood. They're driving a 5 or 6 year old car. They're wearing a 10-year-old suit. They're not really invested in materialism to the extent that we see in the popular culture. But I think this comes from the ability, the deeper dive here is the ability to be resourceful, right? That's really, everyone thinks, well, I want this other life for myself, right? But like the lack of money is the barrier to that better life. And they got it backwards. The lack of money is due to your inability to like prioritize and focus on the compelling goal. So let me tie this concept, if you will, back to the first concept of choice, the compelling goal, right? Think about this for a second. What happens to a person in the absence of a compelling goal? Right? It's so easy to squander your time, your mental capacity, your thought processes, your knowledge, your money, everything on ornamental things, on distractions, right? On things that that's really the part of the power of the compelling goal. You learn how to become resourceful. If you don't have a compelling goal, you got an extra $100 in your pocket, why not blow it on fantasy football, right? But if you've got a compelling goal, you're going to think about that $100 very differently. All right, so the sixth concept is really about brand, and I really think, to me, this is about reputation. Again, you know, without sort of geeking out here in social psychology, but a lot of our understanding came from the field of social psychology. And you know, when you have a business, when you're trying to make yourself useful to other humans, right, which is that's what we do as entrepreneurs, you recognize that your reputation is everything. You have to deliver everything you say you're going to deliver, when you say you're going to deliver it, for the price you agree to deliver it, right? And what tends to happen here is, if you understand that, you start to build what I would call a luck manufacturing machine. So, and then, you know, to the uninitiated observer, the entrepreneur looks like, well, they just got lucky, right? And that's really a novice, you know, that's just really an uninformed view. I listened to a podcast the other day with Naval Ravikant, and he talks about 4 kinds of luck, right? The first kind of luck is dumb luck. You're walking down the street, you find a $100 bill. Good for you, right? That's dumb luck. The second kind of luck is hustle luck. Like you're out there stirring stuff up and shaking the tree. And every once in a while you get lucky. Something happens, right? That's great. But you'll see as we step through these 4 phases of luck, they're less and less about luck, and they're more and more about self-efficacy and action orientation. So the third kind of luck is like industry knowledge. Like when you get deeper into a space, you can start to recognize opportunities that others don't see. But the fourth kind of luck is reputational luck. When you have a reputation of over delivering and under committing, people start to come to you with their problems to solve. They recognize that you can be counted on, and so deals start to come to you. You know, you don't just screw people. You don't leave a reputation in tatters behind you, and over the long period of time, stuff starts to happen. I often tell the story of in my 20s, I was, you know, dead broke and in debt, uneducated. I took a borrowed ladder, strapped it on the roof of my car, and went up into a wealthy neighborhood where I'm not from, and started knocking on doors, offering to clean the leaves out of people's gutters. And, you know, I had enough good sense to show up when I said I was going to show up and do what I said I was going to do. And lo and behold, you know, this business started to grow. I don't love gutter cleaning. I'm afraid of heights, right? But people ask me, can you fix this? Can you fix that? I started to pay attention to what they wanted and needed. And 12 years later, I had a business that was doing $5 million in revenue, right? It was just figuring out what people needed, to getting a reputation that people started to pass my name around as a problem solver. I figured that out. So the other thing, another important aspect that can be gleaned from observing entrepreneurs, and this is what Faris is so good at doing, is creating support communities, right? As entrepreneurs, we're deviating from the norm, from societal norms, from cultural norms, from our own behavioral norms, right? And the people that we typically count on for support don't know how to support us, right? How many of you have relatives You know, you want to start a business, your relatives are telling you, why don't you just go get a job, right? Your parents are telling you, oh no, just go get a job. What are you, crazy? Right? And you know, your parents don't know how to help you, your friends don't know how to help you, your professors don't know how to help you, right? And worse yet, there's so much bad advice out there, right? And then there's, you know, not only bad advice, but people that want to, like, you know, get a piece of you if you're onto something. It's so this is a really important aspect of especially right now. And this is so important what you're doing, Faris, to create this you know, this Zoom group or whatever you're doing for business owners around the world, is to create these meetings we can count in. We can just support each other. What are you doing? How are you coping? You know, what's your next step? How are you adapting? It's super important. We need that social proof. We need to know that other people are getting through this, that they're, and how they're doing it and what they're doing. And so the last idea that I'll lay out here from these observations is persistence. And I think of this as the bookend, right? It begins with a choice, it begins with a compelling goal, and it ends with persistence, right? And this is something you see over and over and over in entrepreneurs. You hear it over and over and over in their stories. What it comes down to is, I just never gave up, right? Again, hugely important right now, right? So, but now this begs the question, like, where does this come from? Where does this ability to persist come from? Is that something you have genetically or you don't? Well, it's not quite that simple, right? And there's a number of ways to think about this. But I think the one that's really the most important right now that I'll talk about for just another minute is a term to think about here is called resilience in the psychological literature. And that's really the ability to get back up after you've been knocked down. Right? That's sort of a component of persistence. And we know that resilience comes from what psychologists call an optimistic explanatory style. That's a very fancy way of saying self-talk, right? So in simple terms, like, what is the story you are telling? Someone's got a mute there. Okay, thank you. What's the story you're telling yourself? And so look at the work of Martin Seligman here. It's if you're telling yourself, this is awful, this is never going to go away, this always happens to me, you know, this problem is global, it's permanent, it's pervasive, it's personal, then you're likely to give up. By contrast, the optimistic explanatory style is someone saying, well, okay, this is fixable. This is temporary. I'm going to get through this. I'm going to use this to make me stronger. And I urge all of you to Google search this term after the call, called the Stockdale paradox. It really speaks to the power. I posted some stuff about it on Facebook yesterday. Right now, in these crazy times, pay attention to the story you're telling yourself. That's how you're going to be able to persist. So I have I have two other slides I want to end with, really, and then we'll take questions here. You know, having interviewed all these entrepreneurs, I think, Faris, the essence of an entrepreneurial mindset is this deeply held, mostly unconscious, taken for granted assumption that it's my responsibility to figure out how to make myself useful to others. And that by doing so, I can empower myself, right? And so another way to think about this is figure out how to make yourself more useful to more people. And, you know what the garden path is, right? It's a line of thinking that we go down that was familiar to us. In this crazy time, we might have to, I'll use the second quote, we might have to learn and unlearn in order to relearn. And so, we might have to let go of our current ways of thinking that are going to blind us to the new opportunities that might arise. So, Faris, that's the quick overview of the 8 concepts. If you want to, get a quick review of those in the book, Who Owns the Ice House? It's available wherever you buy books, Amazon, whatever. It's in paperback, Kindle, hardcover, and audiobook. And so that's that. I'm happy to now just sort of take questions and thoughts and on these ideas.
Yeah,
Thank you, Faris.
No, thank you, Gary. I mean, first of all, thank you so much for sharing such wisdom. We take a lot of things for granted, and when people give us a framework to reference what we do and how we do things, it really helps you be aware and alert. And once you're aware and alert of the activities and how you think or how you do things, then the opportunities to maximize becomes much bigger. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insights. I really appreciate all your words. And clearly we could spend 8 more days, full days, on each one of these topics.
Yeah.
But I think it'll be nice to hear from the people and how they think and how they react to what you stated here with the 8, from the first one, how do you help others, all the way to, the last one of resilience and everything else in between. I think it'll be important to maybe hear what others have done or thought of or doing now to recoup with these uncertain times. I talked to lots of entrepreneurs this week, and they had plans to do things a certain way beginning of the week, and now those plans completely shifted. And to your point, they're going to continue to shift over the next 3 months till we get back to what we might consider normal, whatever that means. So it'll be interesting to see. So I'll open it up. If you would like to ask, I see a couple of questions on, people directly asking on the chat, and then some on the Facebook. So I'll gather those. But for the meantime, if you just unmute yourself and speak, just please watch for background noise. I will unfortunately unmute you if I hear too much loud noises, just because we want to get everyone to hear this. So introduce yourself and just ask your questions. Go ahead. Thank you all for joining. Are you guys shy? Are they shy?
Yeah. No one wants to be the first one to ask a question.
All right, I'll ask.
Just because we want to get everyone to hear this. Go ahead.
Yes, this is Shoaib Shefkat. And my question is regarding the resilience. So when do you feel that it's time to call it quits? Because, going back to the theory, I recently came across Seth Godin's book, Dip. And it goes along, okay, when is the time to quit? Yes, the resilience is, okay, you continue working, you continue. Is it a time frame or is it some feeling that everybody have to answer on their own? Where do you draw the line?
That's a really good question. It's also a very tough question. I listened to a podcast from Tim Ferriss, and he talks about that. And depending on where you are, do you have evidence that what you're offering is useful to enough people? I mean, first of all, is that there? Is there any evidence? Are people, what we've forgotten is that when you produce something useful, that means people will pay for it. That's kind of currency is how we measure usefulness, right? So the first question is, are people paying you for it? So is it useful to people? That's one way to think about your question. But the other way to think about that I've borrowed from Tim Ferriss is in your heart, if it's still not a hell yes, then maybe it's a no, right? But at the end, I mean, there's all these other options, and I'm familiar with Seth Godin. I think I got that book right behind me on my bookshelf, The Dip. You know, are you in a dip or are you on a cul-de-sac? Are you on a dead end, right? That's really the question. I guess the way to answer this would be that we have to make ourselves useful to other humans. So you can never quit, right? You're going to have to pivot. You're going to have to go in a different direction, maybe. But you're always going to have to make yourself useful to other humans. It's a really good question, and it's a tough. There's no way to answer that question with any clarity.
No,
Gary,
I got it. Thank you.
yeah, you know, I think this is really important, and I think you hit on to something. So can you elaborate on when you say pivot? So do I switch my whole business model? Do I shut this, you know, coffee shop and open a restaurant? I mean, what are you talking about with pivoting? How big of a pivot? What can you elaborate a little bit from the learnings that you've seen?
Yeah, and you know, it's like it's geometry, right? Is it a 2-degree pivot or is it a 90 to 180 degree pivot? You know, I don't know. But, you know, all bets are off now, right? And, you know, Faris, you and I started to talk about this before the call started, so I use this as an opportunity. Most of us have been taught to think in broad daylight. When the path is clear, the rules are well known. You got policies, you got procedures, you know exactly what's happening. We're really good at that. School's really good at teaching us how to function in broad daylight. What most of us have not been taught to do is function in the shadows, and how to think and act and operate and learn in the darkness, right? In the shadowy areas where it's not clear, where the path isn't clear and the rules aren't well defined. But what I want to keep coming back to is this idea that you got to figure out how to make yourself useful. Do people want and need what I have to offer? And maybe they're going to want and need it when this insanity is over. So maybe the pivot is a temporary pivot. You know, maybe we should be thinking about it, Faris, instead of like how many degrees of the pivot can we, you know, I was talking to an entrepreneur friend of mine in Philly the other day, and she was talking about, you know, there's insane amount of opportunity out there right now. But if you're not looking for it, if you're clinging to what you're already doing, you're going to miss it, right? And she does a training. She trains people how to get government contracts, right? She's developed a deep expertise in that. Her name is Serena Thomas Moore. I could connect you with her if you're interested, but that's just one way to think about it.
Thank you. Thanks. That's very helpful. I appreciate it. I think there were a few more questions, so I'll let them speak. I heard a few. I interrupted them. Sorry about that. Go ahead. Because I could keep asking him questions.
Yes, this is Lawrence.
Okay.
I have two questions. One, can you follow up a little bit more and talk about the dumb luck? The reason I'm saying that is because a lot of times I tell entrepreneurs, especially new ones, that one of the worst things that could happen to them is that they start making money out of the gate, because sometimes you get a false sense of security that this is going to happen all the time, and you haven't structured things so that you know why it's happening. Can you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, Lawrence, thank you. I mean, I think you got this, man. That to me is really a poignant bit of advice. There's a psychologist his name is Albert Bandura. He's considered one of the top 5 psychologists to ever have lived. I think he's like 94 and he still shows up at his office at Stanford. But he talks about these efficacy moments, like these the bat hit the ball moments, right? That's an efficacy moment. And he talks about the danger when that comes too easily, right? Because then you're going to give up when it gets difficult. Now, on the other hand, it shouldn't take you 300 tries to get the bat to hit the ball, right? It can't come too easily, but it can't be too difficult. It's got to be in that sweet spot, in that what educators would call a zone of proximal development. It's like right at the edges of your reach, so to speak. It's a super important point. You know, Lawrence, to talk about that in a slightly different way, I'm forever, you know, frustrated with the way educators use Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk and Henry Ford as exemplars of entrepreneurs. Because, you know, every once in a while, someone walks out in the desert and sticks a toothpick in the sand and an oil gusher comes flying out. Like, good on you, but that's dumb luck, to your point, Lawrence. But here's another way to think about it, is like you're actually going to be weaker as an organism. If everything's handed to you in life, you got a dog that can't hunt, right? In organizational culture, like when Amazon's got to struggle for decades to become profitable, the culture at Amazon is different from a company like Facebook that, you know, overnight it went boom.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
There's a great book called Anti-Fragile by a guy named Nassim Taleb. He's insanely bright. I can only comprehend about 12% of what he's saying. But it's about these ideas, Lawrence, that you know, the idea of fragility means, you know, like a wine glass, you drop it and it breaks, right? But there's no word for things in nature that benefit from shock. But everything in nature benefits from shock. You actually get stronger from the difficulty. And that's really, Lawrence, I'm just going to use that as a segue to talk about the big idea here. Mm-hmm. That's what's so fascinating about the underdog entrepreneurs. They're turning adversity into an advantage. They use the adversity to make themselves stronger, right? And the literature is quite clear on this. People who learn to optimistically interpret adversity, that's lesson 8, the optimistic interpretation. People who learn to do that become happier, healthier, and stronger than people who have never suffered adversity in the first place, right? That's the real secret to the underdog. They got nothing to lose and everything to gain. It's all upside.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
My pleasure. Gary, with that, actually, with what you just said, would you elaborate on nothing to lose but everything to gain, with not, you know, in two things, in the knowledge and the resourcefulness that you talked about? You know, just maybe one insight from each would be helpful to these, you know, with these days with uncertainty and policy seems to be shifting every day. You're shut down, you can operate, you cannot operate, stay home. You know, what can be done for the entrepreneurs that are trying to figure it out with the resources and the knowledge from your perspective?
Yeah, let me try to unpack that, Faris. So, and you could nudge me if I'm going off into the weeds here, but I want to keep coming back to this idea. You got to figure out how, to make yourself useful. I interviewed this guy named David Rosenthaler, who was at the time the oldest living venture capitalist in the United States. And he used some colorful language, but he said, you know, the world really doesn't care about what you want to do, right? The world cares about what it wants and needs. I interviewed a blind guy that lost his eyesight at age 29, and he invented a way that blind people could watch television with their ears. And he said something to me, Faris, I'll never forget. He said, people will give you all the love and all the money and all the fame you could ever want if you just help them figure out how to get what they want. Right? But again, this goes back to the action, right? The micro experimentation. As an entrepreneur, I mean, here's an important point, Faris. Most of us on this call own a business, right? That's a fair assumption? Okay, we don't know. Let's assume that you do own a business. Maybe you don't.
We assume yes, but I don't know.
Okay. So you're not an entrepreneur anymore. You're a manager, right? So the point that I want to make to really drill into your question, Faris, is, you know, there's an entrepreneurial phase where you're searching for a problem solution fit. And then you find the fit. You figure out something people want and need. And you stop searching. And now you start replicating the useful thing that you discovered in the discovery phase, in the entrepreneurial phase. Right? But what we don't realize, what happens to us, we stop being entrepreneurial and we start being managerial, which we should. You can't always be, you know, the way to fail as an entrepreneur is always be searching all the time, because you'll never get anything done. Once you find something that's useful, then you have to replicate that thing. You have to find more people that need your useful thing, right? Well, most small business owners are in that second category right now, and they got to go back to the first category, right? They got to go back into the discovery phase. So that requires us to behave like detectives, because people are complicated and they don't know what they need. It's not obvious. They're not filling out surveys. That's why the business plan is like useless in that phase, right? Like Mike Tyson said, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. So my advice, I think the simplest way to answer your question, Faris, is like, you got to think like a detective. You got to figure out how to make yourself useful to other humans. And that requires detective work.
And that could come from the knowledge that you've gained from what you've done so far, or from the knowledge that you gained from what you know. And then maybe the resources that you have, the network, the people, the information that you're gathering, that's maybe a combination of both of these two things can really help you figure out what to do next.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's it. That's it. But it's you kind of got to shift gears. It's like, you're not, you know, here's another way to think about this, Faris. The attitudes and skills required to discover an opportunity are distinct from the attitudes and skills required to exploit that opportunity. And the first is, the discovery part is the entrepreneurial part. The exploitative part is the managerial part, right? And people get all that mixed up in their heads. That's why most entrepreneurship programs are all mixed up, because they call it entrepreneurship, but it's really teaching you how to manage a business that already has customers and cash flow and employees and processes and procedures, right? That's not entrepreneurship, that's business management. Those are great skills to have. You need those skills. But those skills are toxic, capital T, toxic, to discovering opportunities. And that's what people need right now.
Thank you. I'll open it again for any more questions. I see one, it's not a question, it's more of a comment, and I'd love for you to collaborate on that. So Tamara has a daycare per se, and she's going virtual learning to the parents to continue paying for their services. So that's one way to maybe pivot. What can you do virtually for now, since you can't really go anywhere per se?
Yeah. And asking, start asking all your clients, like, what is it you need right now? What is your biggest frustration? There's a great book written by the late Clayton Christensen called Competing Against Luck. And it's a fabulous deep dive into understanding not only the functional, but the social and emotional dimension of human needs. You know, in the late 1970s, early 1980s, when Starbucks was founded, coffee consumption in the United States was in steep decline. So any business school professor worth his salt would have told Howard Schultz, like, the evidence doesn't support this, right? And on top of it, if you would have had surveys that said, you know, how much would you pay for a latte? No one's going to say $4.50, right? People don't know what they need. You got to sort of tease it out through like detective work. You're muted, Faris.
Yeah, I said that's great. Thank you. I'm responding to some of the questions and comments on the side here on the Zoom chat. So, any other questions or comments from anyone else? I'd hate to keep asking questions from my end, but I will never stop. I'm always learning. So I'd like to hear from some of the people on the call, if that's possible.
Hi, Faris. This is Bernard.
Go ahead.
Hi, Gary. I have a quick
Hey, Bernard.
question for you. First, a quick comment. Thank you very much for being the guest speaker, and you did an amazing job, very informative. So thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Secondly, I manage a graphic design marketing company.
Yep.
In times like this, what is your advice, as we've already had several clients reach out to us in terms of pausing projects for the next year because of financial challenges already? So as we look at what we do, and we've always had two eyes for it, it's a need and it's a want. What happens is once they get the proposal, it becomes a want. So in this times where everyone is buckling up or buckling down and getting back bootstrapping, what's your advice for us?
Yeah, Bernard, that's such a hard question, and I don't want to pretend like I have all the answers. So let me start with that. But all I would really say now is to think about the skills you have, the assets and the resources that you have, and how can you make those useful to other humans right now? And I don't know what the answer is, Bernard. I honestly don't know. And you know, I was on a call yesterday with a consulting group, you know, for small businesses. You know, some people are, one guy said, you know, draw down all your credit line and just take the cash and put it in your bank account because the banks might stop loaning money to small businesses. I mean, that seems a little bit crazy to me. I would probably do the same thing with, if I were in your shoes with a daycare center, I would start asking my customers, how can we be of service to you right now?
Okay.
What can we do that would be helpful to you? But again, what I want to come back to, Bernard, is, you know, the garden path, like functional fixedness, right? Like we get fixated, like I am a design marketing firm. Like that's, like maybe you got to let go of that and start to allow yourself some space to think about what skills do you have, what assets do you have that can be useful to people right now. You know, maybe it's we're going to do design graphic courses online. I don't know.
Understood.
It's a hard question.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gary. Anyone else? Questions, comments? I'm going through the comments here. And Gary, maybe at one point, they're all asking about the different books that you've recommended. Maybe you could, you know, send me a list of few that you've mentioned. I wrote down a couple, but it'll be probably better if it comes from you.
Yeah, so Faris, you know what I'll do? I'll put together a handful of, I've got a reading list on my website on elimindset.com.
Perfect.
There's a reading list there. you know, there's so many books that it depends on kind of where you are.
That's okay.
I think
A couple that you mentioned, like the anti-fragile, you've mentioned a few of them.
Anti-fragile's at the top of my list. You know, here's a book that I'm going to recommend that I've read, you know, numerous times in my life, and it's called Man's Search for Meaning.
Okay.
Written by an Austrian psychiatrist who was in the death camps during the Second World War. And it's a short read, but it's really, really powerful about, and it ties to the Stockdale paradox. Like, you know, we're going to get through this, right? We're going to get through this. And the Stockdale paradox is really telling ourselves, I'm going to use this to make this is going to make me stronger. As I've matured in the last decade or so, I've really kind of become enamored with the ideals of the Stoics. And you know, Seneca advised us to you know, sleep on the floor a couple of days a week and eat rice and beans for a few days, just so you can kind of feel what it's like to have, like what you're so afraid of, right? And you can face that fear. I mean, one of the things I started doing was like taking ice cold showers in the morning, just ice cold shower, just to shock my body. It's the anti-fragile thing, right? But I think Man's Search for Meaning is a really good book to read right now.
Great. Well, I don't want to keep you here all day because we can. And there's definitely a wealth of information that could be explored here. And I want to be respectful for everyone's time. I know we budgeted 90 minutes, but I know that many people have told me already they only had an hour to join. So I just wanted to be respectful of the 1 hour versus the 90 minutes. And I will stay on for those who would like to chat about anything specific. But
Yeah.
I want to take this opportunity to thank you, Gary, for the amazing insights that you've shared from the lessons that you've learned, as well as your own personal journey. And thank you for making the time. Thank you for making this available. And those who made the time to join us, whether it's Facebook, Zoom, or any other way, text, I got few. Thank you very much for joining and being part of this. And I hope that you find ways to support each other, find ways to leverage the network that you already have and leverage what you already got to figure out what to do next in this uncertain times. But we all know that this has to end at one point. So figure out, you know, what you need to do till you get there, whether it's a month, 2 months, or 3 months, it will end.
Yep. So Faris, I'll send the slides, book recommendations, and so forth in a follow-up email you can send out to folks.
Great. Thank you so much. Any other questions or comments? We could stay on for those who would like to stay. But, you know, I just want to get a gauge of who's on it or who's not. All right. It seems like we're concluding, so I'm going to stop the live feed if I know how to do that. And let's see. More. Stop live streaming. Thank you all.
Thank you, Faris. Thanks to everyone.
I see a few people still on, so if you have any questions, I'll leave it open. If not, I could release everyone from being.
I was just going to say thank you, Faris. It was a great session. Thank you, Gary. A lot of good insight.
Thanks, Joseph. I appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. Right, Gary, I will follow up with a call. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Faris.
Bye, everyone.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.